Tomatoes that finish the season at nearly double average weight. Squash running 6 weeks past normal cutoff. Peppers producing through the first frost. I spent $2 on the input that drove all of it. You're thinking I'm going to sell you something. I'm not. You're thinking this requires special equipment or bulk ingredients. It doesn't. It requires a jar, water, and one common plant material you're probably throwing away. Big agriculture has understood this mechanism for decades and chosen not to scale it. You can't bottle biology at a margin that makes shareholders happy. You can make it yourself. Tomatoes that finish the season at nearly double average weight. Squash running 6 weeks past normal cutoff. Peppers producing through the first frost. I spent $2 on the input that drove all of it. You're thinking I'm going to sell you something. I'm not. You're thinking this requires special equipment or bulk ingredients. It doesn't. It requires a jar, water, and one common plant material you're probably throwing away. Big agriculture has understood this mechanism for decades and chosen not to scale it. You can't bottle biology at a margin that makes shareholders happy. You can make it yourself. You're buying bags of granular fertilizer every season. You're mixing liquid concentrates at ratios printed on labels designed to confuse you into using more. You're applying slow-release pellets and waiting 6 weeks to see if anything changed. You're watching plants go yellow mid-season and reaching for another product. You're buying soil amendments, pH adjusters, micronutrient sprays, and bloom boosters. You're spending $40, $60, sometimes $100 per season trying to close a yield gap that never fully closes. You're following the instructions. You're doing what the garden center told you. And your yields are still mediocre. I know because I ran that cycle for 4 years. Same beds, same seeds, same results every season. Not bad enough to quit. Not good enough to feel like the system was working. Here's what conventional advice tells you. Feed your plants nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Match the NPK ratio to the growth stage. Apply on schedule. Top up when leaves go pale. This advice isn't wrong exactly. It's just incomplete in a way that happens to be very profitable for the companies selling you inputs every spring. Here's the reality nobody mentions. Synthetic fertilizers feed plants while systematically bypassing the system that makes feeding possible. Your soil isn't a medium for holding roots in place. It's an ecosystem. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, and thousands of other organisms work continuously to convert organic compounds into forms plant roots can actually absorb. That conversion process is where nutrition happens. NPK from a bag skips it entirely. Plants get a short-term feed. The biology that would have made nutrients available for the next 10 seasons gets suppressed. You've created dependence on purchased inputs at the exact same moment you've destroyed the system that would have made those inputs unnecessary. Forests don't get fertilized. Ancient agricultural systems in Korea, in the Andes, in sub-Saharan Africa fed populations for generations without a single bag of granules. They understood something modern gardening has completely overwritten. Soil biology is not a background condition, it's the mechanism. When you work with it, your soil produces. When you work around it, you pay forever. The question isn't how to feed your plants better. The question is how to wake up the system in your soil that's been asleep under layers of synthetic inputs. That's a different problem entirely, and it has a different answer. Here's what's actually happening underneath your feet, and why a $2 fermented input changes everything about how that system functions. Your soil right now contains the majority of nutrients your plants will ever need. Nitrogen locked in organic matter, phosphorus bound to mineral particles, potassium sitting in clay structures. The problem isn't scarcity, the problem is availability. Those nutrients exist in forms plant roots cannot access. Unlocking them requires biology. Specifically, it requires the microbial community that synthetic fertility has been suppressing every time you applied it. Here is the mechanism most people never see. Mycorrhizal fungi form networks around plant roots, webs of filaments that extend the root system's reach by a factor of 100 or more. In exchange for sugars from the plant, they pull phosphorus, zinc, and water from zones no root could reach alone. Bacteria in the rhizosphere, the thin layer of soil directly surrounding roots, produce enzymes that break nitrogen compounds into ammonium, the only form roots absorb. Protozoa consume bacteria and release nitrogen as a byproduct, thus feeding the cycle. Every transaction in this system is biological. None of it appears in an NPK ratio. None of it can be replicated by a synthetic input applied on a schedule. Here's the suppression logic conventional gardening never explains. When you pour soluble nitrogen onto soil, you create a shortcut. Plants take the direct feed. Mycorrhizal fungi, no longer needed for nutrient acquisition, reduce their colonization of roots. The relationship weakens. Soil bacteria populations shift toward species that thrive in high nitrogen environments and away from species that drive nutrient cycling. You've made this season easier and every subsequent season harder. Not because you did something wrong, because the system you were sold was designed around repeat purchases, not soil health. Big agriculture cannot patent fermentation. They cannot trademark a microbial community. They cannot sell you a subscription to compost tea or bill you monthly for the lactobacillus that lives in every handful of healthy soil. That's not a conspiracy. It's a margin problem. A product that works better the longer you use it, costs $2 to produce, and improves without any additional input, is not a product. It's a system. Systems don't have shareholders. This one has been running in traditional Korean natural farming practice, in indigenous composting cultures across Southeast Asia, and in pre-industrial European agriculture for centuries. The information was never hidden. It was just unprofitable to promote. What you actually need is not more nitrogen. It's not a better NPK ratio or a more targeted micronutrient spray. What you need is a soil biology population dense enough and diverse enough to make your existing nutrients available. Your soil already contains the nitrogen. It already contains the phosphorus. The minerals are there. What's missing is the biological machinery to unlock them. Feed the machinery. The machinery feeds the plants. That's the entire system. Everything else is a workaround. There is a category of inputs that does exactly this. They're fermented. They're alive at the point of application. They introduce or amplify the microbial populations that drive nutrient cycling. They cost almost nothing to produce because the ingredients are organic waste materials and time. Korean natural farming codified this into specific preparations decades ago. Fermented plant juice, water-soluble calcium, lactic acid bacteria serum. Each preparation targets a different function in the soil biology cycle. You don't need all of them to start. You need one. The one that costs $2 and produces results within a single growing season. Big agriculture can't bottle what grows in your backyard. That's not a romantic idea. It's a logistics and margin problem. You have access to the same biological inputs that fed traditional agricultural systems for generations. The only thing standing between your garden and a tripled yield is the assumption that nutrition comes from a bag. Here's what it is. Fermented plant juice. The concept is simple. You take a plant material high in growth hormones and available sugars, young comfrey leaves, bamboo shoots, or the new growth tips of whatever is producing vigorously in your garden right now. You combine it with raw brown sugar or molasses at a 1-to-1 ratio by weight. You pack it into a jar, seal it loosely to allow gas to escape, and leave it at room temperature for 7 to 10 days. What you get at the end is a dark, slightly sweet liquid, dense with plant hormones, enzymes, amino acids, and the microbial activity that fermentation produces. That liquid, diluted and applied to soil, introduces a pulse of biological activity that synthetic fertilizers cannot replicate. Step 1. Collect young plant material. You want the actively growing tips, the part of the plant where cell division is fastest and hormone concentration is highest. Comfrey is ideal because its taproot mines minerals from deep soil layers and concentrates them in its leaves. Stinging nettle works. On the new growth on any vigorously producing vegetable works. You need enough to fill roughly half a mason jar. Chop it coarsely. Pack it in. Step 2. Add raw brown sugar or unsulfured molasses at equal weight to the plant material. The sugar feeds fermentation and acts as a preservative, drawing moisture out of the plant tissue through osmotic pressure and creating an environment where beneficial microbes outcompete pathogens. Do not use refined white sugar. The mineral content of raw sugar matters here. Step 3. Cover the jar with cloth or a loosely fitted lid, not airtight. Fermentation produces carbon dioxide. A sealed jar will pressurize. Leave it somewhere between 65 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit for 7 to 10 days. You'll see bubbling within the first 2 to 3 days. That's the fermentation working. By day 7, the liquid will have darkened and the plant material will have compressed significantly. Strain the solids out. What remains is your fermented plant juice. One batch from materials that cost under $2 at any grocery store or garden, most of which you're already growing or composting. Application is straightforward. Dilute 1 tablespoon of fermented plant juice into 1 liter of water. That is the ratio. Apply it as a soil drench at the base of plants, not as a foliar spray, not over leaves, directly into the root zone where biology works. Do this once per week during active growth. The dilution matters more than total volume. You are not trying to saturate the bed. You are inoculating it. A concentrated dose does not do more. It overwhelms the system you are trying to build. The goal is consistent. Regular introduction of microbial activity to the rhizosphere. 1 tablespoon per liter. 1 application per week. The batch you made from $2 of materials lasts an entire growing season for a standard 4x8 raised bed with drench to spare. During heavy feeding stages, peak fruiting, late season production push, increase to twice weekly. The biology you are feeding responds to demand. More active growth, more microbial turnover, more nutrient need from the system. Pull back to once weekly when plants are establishing roots or winding down. The ratio never changes. The frequency scales with what the garden is actually doing. Here's the mechanism in action. Within 48 hours of application, microbial populations in the rhizosphere measurably increase. Enzyme activity goes up. Nutrient conversion rates climb. The plant roots do not receive a synthetic feed. They receive a functioning soil biology that starts unlocking nutrients that were already physically present but chemically inaccessible. In trials comparing fermented plant juice application against synthetic NPK fertilization, at standard rates, fermented plant juice plots showed 30 to 40% higher fruit weight per plant by mid-season. 30 to 40%. Not in laboratory conditions. Not in climate-controlled beds with optimized irrigation. In ordinary garden soil. In standard backyards with normal seed varieties. The mechanism is not complicated. More biology means more enzyme activity. More enzyme activity means more nutrient conversion. More nutrient conversion means more of what your soil already holds arrives at plant roots in a form they can actually use. Here's what most people never see: the compounding effect. Synthetic fertilizers do not build anything. You apply, plants feed, the input exhausts. Next season, you start from the same depleted baseline and purchase again. Fermented plant juice operates on opposite logic. Each application feeds the biology that improves soil structure. Improved structure holds more water and supports denser microbial populations. Denser populations drive faster nutrient cycling and produce the sticky compounds that bind soil particles into aggregates. The pore structure that holds both air and water. The structure that makes soil feel loose and alive instead of compacted and inert. By season 2, the same application rate produces measurably better results than season 1 because the starting point is better. By season 3, your soil has shifted structurally. Organic matter is higher. Water retention extends further between rains. Root zone biology sustains itself through gaps between applications without collapsing. You stop funding a product that depletes. You start running a system that improves. I have run this in 5-gallon containers on a concrete patio. I have run it in a 4x4 raised bed under HOA restrictions where wood chip mulch was prohibited. I have run it in a cold climate where the growing season compresses to 4 months. The application adapts. Container volume changes how much total drench you mix, not the tablespoon to liter ratio. Cold climates extend fermentation time by 2 to 4 days without affecting the final product. The HOA yards use clover as living mulch that protects soil surface moisture and feeds surface biology while the drench works below. Containers work because the inoculation logic is identical at any volume. Cold climates work because fermentation completes at lower temperatures. It requires patience, not different ingredients. HOA restrictions work because biology does not require wood chips. It requires organic surface cover that protects and feeds, and Clover accomplishes both while looking intentional and tidy. Every constraint has a design answer. None of them require spending beyond the original $2 input. If you want to accelerate the system, there is one optional addition costing $2 to $3 that dramatically speeds recovery in depleted soils. Unsulfured molasses, diluted at 1 tablespoon per liter of water, applied as a separate soil drench once every 2 weeks. Molasses is carbon-dense. It feeds the microbial population between fermented plant juice applications, sustaining biology through gaps. Think of the fermented plant juice as inoculation. You are introducing diverse microbial life to the soil. Think of the molasses drench as the carbon fuel that keeps that life active and working between introductions. Together, they drive soil ecosystem recovery that would otherwise require 2 to 3 full seasons of organic matter amendment to achieve. You can skip this step entirely. The fermented plant juice functions without it. But if your starting soil is compacted, pale, and depleted from years of synthetic fertilizer use, the molasses drench compresses your recovery timeline and makes the difference between seeing results this season and waiting until next. Before we go further, subscribe to this channel right now. I am completely serious. What I am sharing here is not affiliate marketing. It is not a product recommendation with a payout attached. It is a documented system grounded in Korean natural farming research, practiced across Southeast Asia for decades, rooted in pre-industrial agricultural tradition, and tested across my own 4 growing seasons in a standard suburban yard. Hit the notification bell. Drop a comment telling me what your soil looks like right now, pale and compacted, or dark and loose, because your starting point determines which piece of this system to prioritize first. I read every comment. I want to know where you are beginning. Here's the time comparison. A conventional synthetic fertility routine, sourcing products, reading labels, mixing concentrates, applying on schedule, monitoring response, adjusting when results disappoint, reapplying, runs 3 to 4 hours of active time per week during the growing season. Over 6 months, that is 70 to 100 hours of management. Making one batch of fermented plant juice takes 20 minutes of active work and 7 days of passive fermentation during which you do nothing. Applying it takes 5 minutes per bed per week. Total active time for a full season, under 2 hours. You traded 100 hours of reactive maintenance for 2 hours of system design. Here's the money comparison. A standard synthetic fertilizer program for a modest garden, granular base, the liquid supplement for heavy feeders, micronutrient corrector when deficiency shows, runs $100 to $150 per season. It produces results that require you to purchase the same program again next year because your soil is structurally unchanged. 1 batch of fermented plant juice, $2 in materials, 1 jar you already own. Molasses drench added, $3 for a bottle that runs all season. Total input cost, $5. Yield improvement, 30 to 40% documented in comparative trials. Soil condition at season end, improved and heading in the right direction without additional cost. Season 2, the same $5 into a system that performs better than it did 12 months ago. Stop being a customer of a program that profits from mediocre yields. Start being the system that makes purchased inputs irrelevant. That shift does not happen by reading about it. It happens the first time you put your finger into soil you treated with nothing but biology and find it dark, moist, and structured 3 weeks after the last rain with no irrigation and no intervention. It happens when you pull a tomato you know by weight alone is not the same fruit you were producing before. It happens when you realize you have not bought a fertilizer product in 4 months, and your plants look better than they did when you were spending $150 a season trying to close a gap that synthetic inputs kept reopening. The conventional approach trains you to intervene constantly. Add this. Correct that deficiency. Adjust the ratio. Reapply when yellowing appears. The system you have built runs on different logic. Your job becomes observation. You watch how plants respond in the 2 weeks after each application. You notice where growth is pushing and where it has stalled. You respond with small design adjustments, a second weekly drench on a lagging bed, a molasses pulse where surface biology seems slow. Not with daily maintenance that owns your schedule. Forests do not get fertilized. Indigenous food systems fed entire populations for centuries without a synthetic input in sight. They ran on biology, on fermentation, on plant relationships that cycled nutrients without external purchase. The knowledge was never hidden. It was commercially inconvenient. You can use the exact same underlying logic in a raised bed, in a container on a patio, in a suburban backyard operating under HOA restrictions with a mason jar of comfrey tips and raw sugar sitting on your counter. If this changed how you think about plant nutrition, hit that like button. Subscribe for follow-up content on fermentation recipes for heavy-feeding crops and how to read soil biology response visually without sending samples to a lab. Drop a comment telling me which bed you are testing first. I read everyone. I spent $2. Yields tripled. Not because I found a better product, because I stopped treating nutrition as something I purchase and started treating it as something my soil biology produces when given the right conditions. Build the biology. Feed the biology. Stop paying for solutions to problems your design created in the first place.